Well, hi everyone. Welcome to another episode of Certified Forgotten, the only podcast that reviews films with five or fewer reviews on Rotten Tomatoes. You are in the place to watch the stuff that played at festivals and got forgotten. You're in the place to watch the movies that you can only stream on places like Tubi. I'd say spoiler alert, but every movie we seem to talk about these days is available for streaming on Tubi. So Tubi sponsor us. You know how to reach us. And as always, I am joined by my partner in crime, my co-host, the Matt with the good hair, Matt Donato. How you doing, bud?
Pretty good. I just finished watching a movie on Tubi, the the one streaming platform that definitely does not back Certified Forgotten, but maybe someday.
Did you say Tubi, the free streaming platform with a catalog that rivals those of the major streaming platforms like Netflix and Amazon Prime?
Yes, Tubi, where you can find any of the Certified Forgotten movies that we have covered, and Tubi, where you can pretty much find any damn movie you're looking for, and for free.
Wow, I bet if you went to Tubi.tv, you would learn some we really aren't sponsored. I don't know why we're putting much effort into it.
It's the bit. It's just, we're terrible.
It's fair.
We're terrible people.
Maybe if our guests stop picking Tubi releases, we'll stop pumping them up. But
to be or not to be, we'll see.
Speaking of I was hoping to get out of it without that joke. Speaking of guests, Matthew, we have an excellent one this week, and we have a guest who has had us featured on their podcast. So we're especially excited to introduce today's. Yes.
We indeed are. We are both thankful for being on the podcast that they co-host, and I'll just get right to it. It is Jenn Adams, co-host of the Losers Club podcast, co-host of the Psychoanalysis podcast, and also freelance film journalist. Basically, the most important place being Certified Forgotten. So, Jenn Adams, welcome.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me on your pod.
Thank you. Thank you for having us, too.
If you host two podcasts and write for Certified Forgotten, that's the hat trick.
That's really right.
That is as good as it gets in the world of horror film criticism.
It's pretty much your EGOT.
It.
Yeah, that's
it
your
is.
EGOT
I know.
right there.
I know. This is my last appearance, also too. Like, there's nowhere else to go.
Exactly.
That's fair. We're sorry. We're forcing you into early retirement, but at least you're EGOTted by film Twitter standards.
That's true. Yeah.
And also, I am sorry that I have to kick your butt this week in fantasy football on today, September the 30th, because you are my opponent this week.
Am I really?
Hope you set your lineup.
Just got awkward. I did set my lineup, which on Thursdays is usually just a quick scan to see if I have anybody playing tonight, and then I worry about it on Sunday.
Correct. Yeah. The lineups for Thursday night games are basically, are they playing on Thursday? Great. I'm benching them.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I do have somebody tonight though. And
all right,
coming after you with a vengeance, Donato.
So we're all gonna turn on our little sleeper apps and let this be an exciting adventure for this evening. But
exactly.
But I could talk about our fantasy football teams forever. But we want to talk about horror, and specifically, Jen. I know that you've probably told this story 100 times on your podcast. Since you're a guest in our podcast, tell us about kind of your earliest memories of discovering horror as a genre, what the things were that sort of spoke to you that first like too young childhood experience where you thought like, oh, this is uncomfortable in a good way.
Well, the family story is that my mom, who hates horror, because she's terrified, watched Halloween when she was pregnant with me, like about a month before I was born. So that's my family, who none of them like horror. That's where they say it all started. But I remember, like, I think my first entryway in was Stephen King. I found my dad was kind of a like casual Stephen King fan. So I just grew up seeing it on his shelf and looking at that picture of like the claws through the sewer grate, and I just was fascinated by it. I have this memory of taking my copy of Night Shift to slumber parties and like convincing the girls there to let me read like The Mangler to them. And so I was that kid, and I just was really, really into it. And I remember the first horror movie I ever remember seeing was Fright Night at a friend's house, who had like older siblings and stuff. So that was, I was just hooked, and I wanted to, I was fascinated by it. I was really drawn to it. And, I've got a lot of theories about why that might be, but just from very, very early on, I was really into it.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people have, kind of similar experiences with regards to Stephen King and their parents. Cause again, I'm sure over the years, and I know that Losers Club does long episodes too. So I know you all really get a chance to kind of dive into the books and the topics you're talking about. But yeah, I think that for whatever reason, a generation of boomers were basically like, oh, this is okay reading. Like, yeah, it's all the same stuff that I would ban on a movie. as my wife always says, because she was into books when she was a kid, her parents were like, "Oh, she's reading. It doesn't matter what she's reading." And she was like, "I read a lot of Robert Jordan, so there was a lot of weird stuff happening in those books."
Yeah, totally. I was not allowed to watch a lot of stuff. So I would like record it. Like I would set the VCR to record it. And then I would wake up at like 2 a.m. and sneak into the den to watch stuff that I wasn't allowed to watch. But I mean, I could read pretty much whatever I could sneak into my room. And my dad had a lot of Stephen King on his shelf. So they weren't like checking the bookshelf every day to make sure I wasn't reading. So, you know, I read a lot of that. I had a friend the same friend that I watched Fright Night at her house, she had scary stories to tell in the dark at her house. And so I remember going over there and just like ignoring her and just devouring those books because I couldn't have them at my house. And I couldn't get enough. Something I've talked about a lot on psychoanalysis is I grew up in a really, really stressful house, you know, in a way that like I didn't understand. I did, like I say, it was like The Shining without like the violence, you know. It was just very stressful, and I was just afraid all the time, you know, of things that were too big for me to understand. So horror helped me process that, you know? And so I think that's what I really was drawn to. Like I remember reading when the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark movie came out a couple of years ago. I remember I was kind of diving into the history of the books and learning that they were banned in a lot of places, but that the defenders were like, no, this helps kids put a name on their fear or put a face on fear that is too much for them to process. And I think that's what horror was for me. And that's why I couldn't get enough, because it was helping me like process the things that I just didn't understand that were going on in my life. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot about if I had in my household that open arms embrace of horror, and if I had, you know, basically started my journey earlier on. I won't rehash the journey. I keep talking about it on the podcast over and over again, so everyone knows. But, you know, I avoided it. I avoided it tremendously as a kid. So that was also because my family avoided it as well. And that did create such an anxiety in me, and that created such a fear of horror because, well, it was this thing in my household that no one watched, no one appreciated. It was the weird thing. It was the, you know, let's stay safe. My mom was a teacher. My dad was a cop, as I've said over and over again. So very regulation based, very rules based. And that raised a very paranoid, very anxious child who would think about death and things that, you know, maybe horror could have eased me into, because we talked about this on psychoanalysis, you know, the idea of the Return of the Living Dead just being about death in your face. And yet it's such an enjoyable movie, and the way it's presented, you know, if I had maybe confronted death in that way at a much earlier age, would I have been having panic attacks just from seeing Chucky?
Yeah. Yeah. It's just, it's hard to, it's just so hard to kind of put your finger on a lot of those things. And the more like therapy that I've been going to recently, a lot of why I was drawn to horror and the kinds of horror that I was drawn to is really kind of falling into place. And I was like, oh yeah, oh right. Also, it was like a dare, you know, it was a way to like overcome something and to like watch the really scary movie or read the really, really long book, you know, so that there was like a power in it for me too that I really, really loved.
Yeah, all of my friends growing up were super Catholic, so there was no like social cachet to diving into horror films or anything like that. You were just going to hell,
Yeah.
or at least confession. I shouldn't oversell their condemnation of me.
Yeah. Well, in the Bible Belt, I got a lot of that too, especially being a girl. You know, people just didn't really get it. I still get from my family, like, I don't know how you watch that stuff. I'm like, yeah, okay. All right.
Well, how did that, talking about like when you were young and how that became kind of a coping mechanism for you, or at least a way for you to explore some of your own anxieties that you were feeling? How did that sort of develop as you got a little bit older? I mean, was it always something that was sort of simmering in the background, or did you to kind of take ownership over it a bit in your teenage years, and it became kind of like a cultural thing, a community thing, a social thing, as well as a coping mechanism?
You know, it really hasn't been a social thing for me until like the past 5 years.
Hmm.
It was, I could usually convince friends to go see movies with me. Like, I remember another one of like my formative horror experiences is I remember going to see Scream in theaters, and I was 16. I had just gotten my driver's license. So I think it was one of the first places that I drove to. And so I have this really clear memory of walking into the theater and just being so excited, and then just falling in love with that movie. And 90s slashers, that's my favorite stretch, or like my favorite genre of movie. And I feel like there's a safety to those movies in a way that I think is really comforting to me, which is probably why I could get a lot of people to go to them. I wasn't asking people to go to torture porn. Like, I could
Right.
get somebody to go see I Know What You Did Last Summer when I couldn't get somebody to go see Hostel with me later on. So I would watch them, but I was the one that was into it. I was the one that really cared. I was the one who knew what was coming up and was kind of plugged in a little bit. And I mean, I laugh now. I was not at all plugged in compared to what I am now, but it was a fun thing. But I remember I took a lot of my VHSs to college with me, and I would just watch them by myself because I didn't really have anybody in my life that loved horror the way I did, or that really, like, I would try to get my dad to talk to me about Stephen King, and that's when I realized he was just kind of a casual fan. And I was like, no, but on page 70 he's saying this, and like I couldn't really ever find anybody to engage with me. And another one of those moments was when I watched The Loved Ones, and it was, I can't remember, maybe it had been 7 or 8 years ago, relatively soon after it came out, and nobody in my life had ever heard of that movie. And I just remember dying to talk to somebody about this, because that's right on the limit of how much I can handle, like gore wise, or at least at the time it was. And I was dying to talk to somebody, and there was just nobody I didn't have anybody to talk to. And so I ran into a friend at a high school youth group reunion, and he had been in Hollywood for a while trying to be a writer, and he loved horror. He was like the only person that I think, and I remembered like growing up and kind of having off conversations with him, but he was more my brother's friend. And so he was like, hey, I've got this idea for a podcast and we're looking for a girl. And so that was, and I started finding a little community, and I was like, okay, well, I've got thoughts that are just spilling out and like exploding out of me to talk to somebody about. So that was where I started to finally find a community with it. So
Yeah, and I want to hit on the kind of like the 90s horror thing too, because I think, we kind of take for granted the quality of 90s slashers. And many people talk about this, but sort of it's always fun to look back and kind of think that was sort of a period where horror went mainstream in a way that it hadn't for a long time before, and hasn't really since, right? They were
mm-hmm.
casting mainstream young up and coming actors that already had a cachet. They weren't people that were years away from being established, but were kind of at the peak of their power already. These were things that were not modestly budgeted. They were like mid-range Hollywood budgets with recognizable filmmakers associated with them. It's just it's wild to think back, especially as good as horror is now, and how you can't, no period in Hollywood history holds a candle to whatever current year we're living in when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to horror quality and volume of horror. But the 90s just couldn't be topped in terms of the fact that it was a mainstream and a socially acceptable thing to do in a way. Like, people went and saw Scream, people went and saw I Know What You Did Last Summer.
Mm-hmm.
And it's wild to kind of think back on that. And it does make me wonder, like, yeah, how many people were able to introduce others to horror, were able to, like, get people into a movie theater to see Scream, who would never go see, like, not even want to see like Fear Street or something now, right? Like, that
Mm-hmm.
that we're just like, oh, everybody's talking about it, so I have to go do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Like H2O was my first Halloween movie, and I went to see it because I knew Michelle Williams from Dawson's Creek, and because Josh Hartnett is hot. But that was like an
Mhm.
entryway in for me. And I was always terrified of the slashers, which I laugh at now because those are my favorite. Like, I don't know. Everything is my favorite, but I love slashers. But I was really scared of them. I was terrified of Jason and Freddy and Michael Myers. And so that was what got me in the door of the theater, was just people I knew, somebody I knew on TV, or this TV show that I watched.
Well, I think that's like, the slashers that became popular, they all have the iconic villain. You're talking about
Mm-hmm.
Freddy, Jason, Chucky, XYZ, XYZ. So
Mm-hmm.
they become the faces of horror. They become the faces of Halloween. And that very much, that's Chucky for me, where I was so afraid of this killer doll that was how high. And, watching the films now, it is a bit hilarious to me that I was
Mm-hmm.
so afraid of this doll, because I mean, it really only stays straightforward horror for two movies, if we're being honest. The
Mm-hmm.
third movie very much starts leaning into the comedy of it way harder. Child's Play 2 still has the comedy, and then the fact that Bride of Chucky and Seed of Chucky were the commercials that gave me such a fright and caused me such anxiety, and yet one of them is Seed of Chucky. Like, we don't,
Mm-hmm.
like, it's weird to kind of think about how we separate the iconic villain from the films themselves, when a lot of the times they just became slashers themselves. Like, we know how they ran their course, and especially 80s slashers, they stay scary for one or two, and then all of a sudden, the sequel after sequel, you kind of have to go, how do we make this interesting? How do we differentiate? Well, humor
Yeah.
always helps, and they just became like horror comedies at the time. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like with those iconic villains, like I knew exactly who they were before I had ever even thought about watching a movie. So, like, in my mind, they were these nightmares, like these soulless monsters that were going to come kill me. And the thing about Stephen King is he has got some terrifying stories and some terrifying villains, but there's a lot of humanity and warmth in the stories, because I think he just writes his characters so well. And somebody like Michael and Jason seemed like just devoid of humanity, and that terrified me. And I was like, I can't do this. This is too far from me. And now I watch it and I put it in context of a story, and it's a lot easier. And then, then I discovered Final Girls, and I was like, okay, I am in forever on this, because they just have my heart. So.
Well, let me ask you, because you mentioned Stephen King, and of course you have a Stephen King podcast that is, by podcast standards, a seasoned veteran at this point.
Yeah.
What are your favorite Stephen King books?
Oh, okay. My all-time favorite is The Stand. It's the first novel I think I ever read by him, and it just has my heart. I absolutely love it. I've probably read it 5-ish times at this point, and listened to it probably more than that. But my other 4, I can't pick between my babies, but I've got an obsession with Charlie McGee from Firestarter, because the book Firestarter, it has got some big problems, and I am aware of those, but I love Charlie McGee. And then The Shining, Pet Sematary, 11/22/63, and Misery are my favorites. So, yeah.
It's interesting. Every time I ask people that, I feel like I'm doing it wrong, because my favorite
Oh, yeah?
Stephen King books are Needful Thing and Insomnia.
Oh, I love
Which
Needful
is like,
Things.
but neither of those books ever show up on anybody's like top of list. And honestly, like, Insomnia it's always been kind of relegated as a second tier King.
Yeah.
But I think in a lot of ways it's one of his, like you said, humanist, like one of his most deeply empathetic and humanist works that he's produced.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of the like bag of bones, end of life or end of career, kind of the thing that he spent a lot of time in the 2000s working on. It was that before that. So like, if you
Mm-hmm.
like Bag of Bones, if you like some of his more recent work, Insomnia has always scratched that itch for me. And every time I get an opportunity to ask a Stephen King fan, I'm like, what are your favorites? I'm just waiting for somebody else to say Insomnia. Nobody ever does.
Insomnia is good. I do like it. The first time I read it, I did not like it at all. And I was like a teenager, and I just don't think I was ready for it, But it is in the stretch of my favorite King novels, which I kind of think of as the Eclipse. It's not a trilogy. It's a quad cycle. And that's
Quadrology.
Yeah, quadrology. Yeah. But it's with Gerald's Game and Dolores Claiborne, and then Insomnia, and then Rose Madder. And that's where he's really exploring like intimate partner violence in a way that I've got some theories about how it ties into his sobriety, and just I find it really fascinating. And so that element of Insomnia has always really been intriguing to me. Are you a Tower head? Have you read The Dark Tower?
I've read The Gunslinger, and I
Okay.
keep meaning to do. The problem with The Dark Tower is every single person I talk to about The Dark Tower is like, oh my God, it plugs into every other book in the series,
It
right?
does,
And
yeah.
he ultimately writes himself in as sort of the architect role of the entire literary universe of Stephen King novels. And I'm like, do I really, I feel like I need to go back and like at least read like 3 or 4 books. I don't need to read everything, but I at least need to go kind of like re-immerse myself in the world of King, like the Castle Rock world of King in particular,
Mm-hmm.
in order to feel like I'm getting the most out of the Gunslinger series. So it's not just a commitment because it's 7 books or whatever that
7,
number
yeah.
is. 7 books. It's also a commitment because I feel like I needed to go in and refresh on a couple of key books before. And I'm sure somewhere online somebody has a list of like the Stephen King books you really need to read before you read the Dark Tower series.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, that's a year. That is easily a year of effort on my part.
Yeah, it's a big commitment. I am not a huge Tower head. That's not like I love the second book, The Drawing of the Three. Have never been more surprised by how much I loved a book. And if I had not been a Stephen King completist, I would not have read the series. I'm really glad I did because I love the way it wraps up. But I mean, yeah, try the second book, and if you like it, then, you know, maybe keep going at your leisure. But like, he wants us to enjoy his work, you know, and I feel like if we don't enjoy it, like, he's okay with us not reading it, you know. So
Right.
I don't know, but it does. I mean, I don't want to spoil anything, but there's an interesting tie into Insomnia, which is why I asked, which is, you know, you might find intriguing. So,
well, I haven't read Insomnia since I was 22 years old ish,
oh
23
yeah.
years old. So I am due for a reread, I think.
Well, it
And
is one of the ones
King is
that I
one of
would.
the few. Yeah, I was going to say King is one of the rare authors that I actually do reread periodically
Uh-huh.
because
Oh yeah.
I have the same relationship with film as I do with books, which is just like should I read this, I watched this, should I really spend my limited amount of time going back and revisiting something that I already know? Like, there's just so much stuff out there. But
Mm-hmm.
for King, I make an exception. I reread Needful Things probably once every 2 years or so.
Oh yeah. Before I discovered podcasts, I just listened to Stephen King audiobooks over and over and over again. And then I was like,
Oh,
there's other stuff I can listen to.
sorry, Stephen King. We got rid of some of those Audible royalties for you.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I still have them. I still listen to them occasionally.
Donato, do you have any Stephen King you like? I've never asked you that question before.
No, I have not broken into the literary world of Stephen King. I just have the adaptations.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's awful.
It is totally fine. I've been checking my fantasy score. Don't worry about it. Like, you guys are
who's
doing your
winning?
thing. Oh, I am. James Robinson has 12 points already in the first half, so I'm doing okay.
Oh no. Uh-oh.
All right.
In any
I
case,
vow to be
no.
ahead by the end of this recording.
Listen, this
By the way, guys, if you do your math, you can figure out exactly within a 5-minute span of when and where we recorded this episode. I'm just saying.
Right.
There's no mystery to this recording session.
I'm happy to let the actual experts talk about something, and for me to sit back. This is why we have two hosts here. This is why we have co-hosts, because we get the breadth of everything. We get to hear a little variety.
That's right.
And it's early in the season, but you're on the ropes already, so you need a win.
Yeah. I'm not doing too hot either, but I will say, if you ever want a list of Stephen King books to break in, it's like a fun challenge for me to find like just the right Stephen King book for somebody. So, you know,
My one author that I have a very good track record with, I haven't completed everything, but I've read most of, is Michael Crichton. That is my one author that I have devoted my time to, because I am typically watching movies and not reading. If I am, it's more likely comic books, like a hack slash, things like that nature. So that's where my reading time goes.
No, I know this one actually. Jen, see if you back me up here. So, like, what we know about Donato is that he likes his signature villains. He's a bit more of an action, like he likes a little bit of spectacle in his horror films. We know that he's not averse at all to sort of like goofy or weird tonal switches. I'm drawing a blank on the name of it. It's the Bachman companion piece to The Regulators.
The Regulators is Bachman. Desperation is the King one.
Desperation.
Is Stephen King. Regulators is Richard Bachman. Yeah.
Desperation. For my money, Desperation would be because it's got a signature villain. It's goofy as hell. It's like all of the best and worst instincts of Stephen King on the page.
Oh yeah, it's nasty.
And it's a top 5 book for me. I fucking love it. But it's just it is the demon wind of Stephen King novels. There you go.
That's all you had to say.
It really kind of is.
It's literally all you had to say.
It is. Yeah. It's bananas. Yeah. But it's really thematically rich too, you know, but also like there's like bodies ripping apart. So yeah.
If you tell me it is the best and worst of someone, that is literally like one of my selling points. Of just like, oh, it gets messy. Hell yeah.
Yeah. Desperation. If you ever say I want to start with King, Desperation is the book that's going to make or break your relationship with him.
Nice.
Because King is that author that has like both, like he can do the like, you know, moody and purgatorial and like, you know, sad sack kind of genre that I like, but it can also do like the goofball, like here's a 7 foot tall Egyptian god whose skin is ripping that can only say talk. That's the kind of thing that I think that you would gravitate towards a little bit more too.
There is a story called A Very Tight Place about a man who gets trapped in a porta potty and cannot exit through the door. So yeah, he writes about some gross stuff, but yeah, he can also like really like I sobbed at the end of Billy Summers, which is his newest one. Like he also really knows how to like wring your emotions out, which I think is what I really like about him a lot, you know, is he writes about his characters are just phenomenal.
Well, then, like
Yeah.
on the counter side, though, to bring the question of, what's your favorite King novel? I mean, like, what is your favorite King adaptation in that sense? Then, what film do you think actually nails the essence of King the best, or maybe it doesn't, and that's why the film works?
Um,
It's not Desperation. I'm just going to throw that out there
oh
right now.
no! Although
It is not Desperation.
it does have Steven Weber in it, which is a selling point. But yeah, it is.
That is one of the rare films that I turned off because I love the novel so much, and I like started it and I was like, done,
Yeah.
can't do this. I have a life to live.
Yeah, a lot of the miniseries are. I think my favorite one is Gerald's Game. I absolutely love it. That's a book that really means a lot to me. It's just right outside my top 5, and it's funny to be talking about it now, but I'm a huge Mike Flanagan fan. I think he speaks my emotional horror language. So I watched that. And I mean, if you've read Gerald's Game, the majority of it takes place in the head of a character. So everybody was like, well, this is unfilmable. How can you make a movie about this? And I think the way he did it, and the way he kind of staged it and brought out a lot of the themes, but made some smart changes. I just loved. I know the ending gets a little bit of criticism because it's got that Flanagan schmaltz at the end, which is straight out of the book too. So it's a little bit of King too. But that is like therapy for me. That movie, it's just it's amazing. I love it. And then I got a soft spot for The Mist too. It's good.
Yeah, I think the Mist is pretty classic stuff. I don't like The Shining. I'm on record as having said that. I don't like I don't like The Shining.
I don't
It doesn't
like
do
The
anything
Shining
for me.
either. No, the book is amazing, and I could
Mhm.
go off on a whole soapbox about the difference between the book and the movie. The movie is. I don't like it. I want more from it. I don't know. I have a
agree.
lot of thoughts about that.
Well, I don't want. Oh man, I could talk about Stephen King forever. I don't want to completely take away from the film that we are talking about today, which isn't a Stephen King film. So, last question before we take a quick break. Let's talk, because I think this will tie in a minute. Let's talk a bit about your work with psychoanalysis, your horror podcast as well, because Donato and I have both been on it, so we're biased, but we think it's great. But really, really and truly, the lens of mental health that you and your co-hosts are bringing and analyzing films through, I think is. I mean, we're kind of in an era where I think we're starting to really appreciate the positive role that horror plays with a lot of people. For everything from like a coping mechanism to like understanding concepts of sexuality and gender through horror. It's all been subtext, but I think it's now moving a little bit more forward into how we think and write about these movies at like a really broad level.
Mhm.
So talk a little bit about kind of how that came to be, and what your I don't want to say success stories, but like what inspires you to keep going with that, knowing that you guys are dealing a lot of times with some really heavy stuff.
Yeah, it is. It's often heavy, and that's why, every other week, we do a comfort horror episode, which are the ones that you two have been on, where we I take the pressure off just a little bit, and we talk about a fun movie, and then we go back to talking about the movie about grief, or depression. But so I said I think I was really drawn to horror because it helped me understand fear, like the fear that I experienced as a kid, and the older I got, I think the more I understood how much horror helps me understand who I am, and I say this to people who say they don't like horror, we use it to understand who we are and what we care about, because we all tell these horror stories. We say, if I was going to die tomorrow, what would I do today? And if my house was burning down, what would I save? Those are horrific things. It's death and destruction of everything you love. And those are stories that we use to help us understand what we care about and who we are and what we want to spend our time with. And so I think that's horror helps me process that. And I had thought about doing a show like this when I started going to therapy, and I started talking about Gerald's Game was one of the first ones that I talked about. I was like, this really helped me process something in a particular way. And it's still something that I use as a visual cue, as kind of a safety place. But yeah. And so I lost track of how many times I had spoiled a movie for my therapist because I wanted to talk about the ending, and I wanted to talk about what this movie meant to me in relation to my mental illness or my what I was going through in that moment. I was like, there is something here. And I wish that more people talked about mental health And I wish that more people were kind of dissecting these things. And I wasn't really seeing anybody do that. Like, I would watch a movie and I would try to see what had been written about it. And I would see a lot of times, like I think about The Babadook, or I think about like a movie like Mungo. And I was finding a lot of people writing about how it connects to mental health, but nobody really saying anything about it, like saying what that experience was like or what it helped them understand or helped them process. And I just found that I wanted to talk about this. I wanted to write about this. Like, if there are two things I write about, it's feminism and it's feelings. And I want everyone to be more in touch with how they feel about things. And I think horror is the perfect way to do that. And so it just kind of made sense to do a podcast about it and kind of tackle stuff. And so that's kind of what keeps me going. Like, the amount of people that have reached out and said, like, because we're still kind of a smaller pod, but just saying, like, you guys helped me get through the pandemic, or like, you guys are talking about things that nobody else is talking about, or like we're having really hard conversations about things that I think are important conversations to have, but that are scary and they're hard. And so I've just really enjoyed kind of getting to know Mike and Laura in a really kind of personal way and sharing about stuff, and it helps me process. So part of it is selfish. Like, I want to talk about these things, but you know, if somebody else hears it and feels safer talking about it to someone else, then that's kind of why I want to do it, you know. That was a long and rambling answer, but
no, it was a great answer. And I like the fact that you talked about, I think that a lot of times in film criticism, especially when it comes to kind of like cultural or social criticism baked into that, I think a lot of writers are really good at identifying, and I'm as guilty of this as anyone, identifying things like, references to mental illness, or like, for example, I watched The Night House, which is it's just a phenomenal performance by Rebecca Hall. And even I kind of watching it, I was reading afterwards that people were like doing deeper dives into how it actually correlates so strongly to the stages of grief and like the emotional processes that go into that. I'm like, that's the, I can write about it and I can say, she's experiencing trauma, and that's true. But like the ability for people to parse through what that means from a behavior standpoint, what that means from like, the actual changes, the hybridization, I think, of film critics, that there are people that sort of have these multi-mixed backgrounds, that they have one foot in the realm of mental health and are also film critics and can bring kind of like a really lived experience to this sort of stuff. That's to me, that's so cool. It's so great that we have people that come from like diversity, equity, inclusion backgrounds that can write about representation in film, that it's not just a bunch of people that are like, I recognize SAD, and that's kind of like where the discussion ends. So it's always been like, I'm really love what y'all are doing, because you're bringing that depth and crunchiness and meatiness to it. It's not just like, this is a movie about depression. It's like, let's talk about the stages of depression. Let's talk about how the characters move through those and what they're meant to represent, because that's happening on the other side. Obviously, these filmmakers are bringing in folks. They're going to kind of like explain to them and show them and help them write about this and ground it in actual medical research and study, and to not give it the same kind of weight on our side as film critics. It's so neat that there are people out there that are doing that now, and it's not just people that are sort of generalizing about things that probably shouldn't be generalized about.
Yeah. I've really, really loved it and learned a lot about myself through talking about it, but yeah.
Well, let's put all of that to the test, because when we come back, we're going to talk about a film that I have basically been calling, when my wife asked me what it was about, I just said Intrusive Thoughts. So
yeah.
when we're back, we're going to talk about 2018's Eat Me. So we'll see you in a second. Hey everyone, thank you for listening to this episode, and a special thanks to our patrons who help support the writers that write for CertifiedForgotten.com. Every episode, we let them ask us a couple of questions. No holds barred. We answer what they have to say. Donato, who do we have, and what are they asking us this week?
The first one we have is from Mr. Nathaniel, a new member to the Patreon. And the question is quite simple, because Nathaniel is doing a little recreational horror rewatch, is the way that they worded it, and they are just diving into movies like The Descent and things in nature. So the question is simple: I just watched The Descent and The Ritual, and I'm starting to really love this little micro genre. So, for my bumper, can I ask the two of you to talk about your favorite outdoor recreation-related horror films?
So mine is easy. It is Adam McDonald's Backcountry, 2014 horror film starring Missy Peregrine, who you will know from either Stick It or FBI, which really depends on what kind of a life you lead. But it is a very simple tale about a young couple that goes hiking in the woods, and there's a bear. And I don't want to say much else other than that. That's probably all you need to know going on. It is probably one of the more tense outdoor films I've ever seen, and as somebody who grew up in Alaska, yeah, that's why Andrew will go camping with me when we visit Alaska, or just anywhere, really, even in parts of the world where there aren't any bears.
I'm glad I asked you before recording this bumper what you were picking, because I was going to pick the same thing. I adore Backcountry. It is very good. It is the easiest pull quote ever, but it is Jaws for camping. Like, it is to a T that tense and that intense, because we're talking about camping.
I'm ready for what you got.
Pun. Acknowledge my pun.
I'm not going to do it. What you got?
It. I have a movie called A Lonely Place to Die. It is a 2011 film directed by Julian Gilby. And this is a movie about mountain climbing. And it is specifically about climbing the Scottish Highlands. Except when Melissa George, who is our lead actress here, goes climbing over the Scottish Highlands, she finds a kidnapped girl. And finding that kidnapped girl leads to finding other not great things. So thus ensues a chase away from evildoers while scaling mountainsides and navigating crumbly cliffs, let's say. So her and her party basically have to survive nature and also survive something that is chasing them from behind. That's it. That's all I want to say. And it like, I don't do great with heights. I can do like roller coasters and stuff that go fast, but if we're just talking about standing still and looking down, that kind of height stuff, this movie really triggered some like anxieties for me in a good way. So like it really hits that vibe well.
Well, there you go, Nate. Thank you for supporting Certified Forgotten, and welcome to the most stressful double feature you're having in your life.
Speaking of double features, or maybe even triple features, I don't know. Let's get into it. Ian has our second Patreon bumper for the day, and it is You're Throwing a Halloween Bash. What would be your perfect Halloween movie lineup? And I'm going to go one step further and say, Monagle, you can only pick Certified Forgotten movies.
All right, I like this. So there aren't necessarily a lot of themes that all of our movies fall around because everybody kind of brings what they want to the table. But you gave me a little bit of a heads up, so I had like a little bit of time to prepare. And I think the one thing that I'm drawn to with some of the titles that I've enjoyed that we talked about on the show are films that are sort of single location, psychological thriller, man versus beast or man versus man kind of things. But like that sense of confinement is part of it. So the three that I would choose as a triple feature are Rattle the Cage, Burning Bright, and Dead Mary, each of which are very different. One is sort of like prison cell drama thriller. The other is about a tiger in a house. And the other is about, invoking a evil ghost woman and having her kill all of your friends. But what each of them does and does well, I think, is utilize a single space, use economy of space in order to tell a scary story pretty well. So that would be my central theme is use of space, and those are the three films, Rattle the Cage, Burning Bright, and Dead Mary, that I would choose.
So I will keep mine a tad bit. I'm going to make it easier for me because I'm going to do horror comedies, and this is what I do. And I tweeted this out. If you're going to do a triple feature on Halloween or around Halloween, you want to have a good time with some of the movies we have covered, I'm going to say let's use Patchwork, let's use Deep Murder, and let's use The Convent. And if you go in that order, I think it is going to be quite the trip, because basically Patchwork, you get the... we've talked so much about Tyler McIntyre's work and, Patchwork specifically on an entire episode with Amelia, so I don't really need to say much more about it. Go listen to the episode if you want to hear more about Patchwork and why it's awesome. Deep Murder. Trace brought us that. It is a softcore slasher parody, is the quickest, most succinct way I can say that.
But like
I
that,
love
but
this movie.
good. Because I know that everybody's going to hear that and be like, but good.
It is that, but good. And you get stuck in the porno itself. It doesn't take place on the set of a porno. It goes Adult Swimming away, and it stays there. So I had so much fun with that. I think I've watched it maybe 3 or 4 times since the episode, and I just love it more. And then The Convent, 2000s horror, Mike Mendez. And I can't get away from how quintessentially 2000s this movie is. It's like going to a miniature golf course that's like blacklit and glow in the dark, except it's horror and nuns.
So there you go. If you've been paying close attention, if you are looking in spooky season for a few movie recommendations covered on the podcast and elsewhere, we gave you eight titles to choose from during this bumper. So my friends,
That's a lot. That's a good amount.
go forth and conquer. And we'll see you back after the break. It's movie time. Okay, so Eat Me is a 2018 horror film. It is written and starring Jacqueline Wright, who is a Los Angeles playwright. Eat Me is actually based on a 2005 play that debuted in Los Angeles. So this is a stage to screen adaptation. And when you watch it, I think it carries a lot of its stage DNA into the film version as well. But the description that you'll find on any streaming platform near you is a suicidal woman and a violent home intruder test the limits of human endurance and the boundaries of forgiveness over the course of one torturous night. It is effectively a two-person play, as Jacqueline Wright as Tommy and Brad Carter as Bob. It is directed by Adrian Cruz, and I joked before the break that it is basically Intrusive Thoughts the movie. Whew, it is basically Intrusive Thoughts the movie. I don't know how else to describe it other than that. So we don't normally do content warnings, but I feel like if you're going to watch this film because we recommend it, I want to throw out that especially the first 25-30 minutes of the film deal with issues of rape. They deal with issues of domestic violence and sexual violence. There is a very, very strong subsection of incest that runs through the movie as well. So there is hard stuff here to watch, and if you skip out on it, nobody's going to blame you. But I should also say that sometimes we invite a guest and they ask, how do I pick a movie? And sometimes we invite a guest and they're like, fucking, this is my movie. When we invited Jenn on the podcast, this was the one and only movie that she was ready to talk about. So let's start, Jenn, with you talking about this film. And I actually went back on Twitter because every time I watch a movie, I search the title and people I follow on Twitter to see what the conversation's going. And you've been talking about this movie pretty much since the day and date it was released.
Yeah.
So what is it about Eat Me that you love so much?
Well, it's complicated. This is such a complex movie, but I have to say, like, all week in my head has been that song from the Adams Family Values, the Eat Me, sauteed or barbecued. That's always what comes into my head when I watch this movie. This is a really challenging movie. And I remember I found it when I was part of the Modern Horrors Podcast Network, and if we wanted to vote in the year-end awards, we had to watch all of the movies in the category. So I was watching this and I was like, okay, well, I've got to make it through because I want to be able to vote in this category. And I don't even remember what it was. It was probably best male performance and best female performance. But my friend Patrick Anderson, who still writes for Modern Horrors, he is the one who had nominated it, and he was really championing it. And he was like, I think you'll really like this. And about 30 minutes in, I had to I stopped it and I had to slack him and ask him to spoil some stuff for me. I was like, how bad is this going to get? Right around the time he gets the knife out and he starts talking about surgery, I was like, okay, I need to know where this is going. I need to know how much I'm in for, because I wanted to finish it, but I didn't want to watch that. And I think there's just so much in this. I think it's funny. I had not thought about it in context of Intrusive Thoughts, but I can see that now. And I think there's just a lot here. I don't know if I would call this a rape revenge film. I think it shares a lot of the same DNA as rape revenge. And I think there's a lot of empowerment in it. There's kind of an exploration of toxic masculinity, I feel like, that I find really interesting. It's really nasty, but it's nasty and challenging in a way that I think is really honest. And that's, I think, what I'm drawn to here, is that I feel like this movie and Jacqueline Wright it's just fearless. And these are the things that we are ashamed to say. These are the things that we are afraid if we say no one will love us anymore, or that our lives are effectively over. And so we don't say them and we hide them, and that just perpetuates that shame. And I think this movie gives me a catharsis of like, no, it's okay to release that, and that is shame that I'm carrying myself, not shame that other people are putting on me. So yeah, that's in a nutshell.
So I'm going to ask you a hard question here, and I don't think that there is necessarily any agreed upon answer, but the film opens with a suicide attempt and
Mm-hmm.
then follows that almost immediately with two rapes in relatively short order,
Mm-hmm.
both of Tommy, the main character. So people are going to struggle, right? The same
Yeah.
way that you struggled, the same way that I struggled. Here's the tough question. What makes that valuable to a narrative? When is that exploitative? And you can speak just solely for you as a viewer. When you see sexual violence on screen, taking in the entire direction of the film and knowing where it goes, what is that line for you between exploitative and transformational, cathartic, like important to the narrative, etc.?
Well, I think the easy answer would be who is telling the story. Like, if it is a woman or a survivor telling the story, I think that is where I feel like a certain kind of empowerment in telling that narrative. I do really love rape revenge films. I find a lot of strength in them, and I am a survivor, and so I watch this, and I think it is a hard film to watch, but the rapes in this are depicted in a way that I don't find it's not, I don't think it's graphic. The actual assaults I don't think are graphic, but what I feel like is the entire assaults and the entire ordeal is the closest thing that I see, if I can say this in a way that makes sense. That is what it actually feels like. That is like, I think a lot of times people see a sexual assault and they see sex, especially if it's not something that you've experienced or something that you've really lived with. And I think the assault in this, it's demeaning, it is terrifying in ways, but it's also like really embarrassing and dehumanizing in a way that I think just kind of showing an assault doesn't always capture. Like, I watched the first 20 minutes of that and I'm like, yeah, that's what it feels like. That's what is going through your mind. Like, what is the next thing that's going to happen, and why? Like, it's I feel like it puts you in the mindset of experiencing something like that. And I think there's value in that, because I think it's a hard thing for people who haven't experienced it to understand. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I understand, and I obviously can't speak to that experience at all. But we've talked, and I think we did it just as much last week, and with the last episode in Bag Boy Lover Boy, the idea of like sexual violence that is sexual versus sexual violence that is not intended to be, sex, not sexual. What's the word I'm looking for? Sexy is not the right word, but you know what I mean? Like, it's the
Yeah, yeah,
distinction between when this is supposed to be, or when this intentionally or otherwise blurs into the line of like titillating, and is
yeah,
that sort of exploitative where you're supposed to be like, this is bad, but also aren't you secretly kind of enjoying a little bit? that's
exactly. Yeah.
that's always a lot of filmmakers, especially a lot of male filmmakers, kind of fall into that line, and you're like, ooh, that's like, you cut that scene from your script. You have no idea what you're doing.
Yeah. But you can't really watch this and I feel like enjoy it in any kind of way.
Right.
This is hard. And so I was thinking about that too, because I am very sensitive to content warnings and trigger warnings, and I understand like triggers are like, I have a lot of triggers, and so there are some things I don't want to watch. But there's like, I watched the Poughkeepsie tapes a couple of years ago, and it's just been stuck in my head in this way. Like, it's helped me really process a lot of things too. And there's a line at the end where he says, that one of the doctors is talking about Cheryl, and she says, and some things she experienced are too horrible even to talk about. And I think I understand what he's saying there, but that always kind of hit me as like, but then she's the only one who knows about it. She's alone in this experience. And so I think like there's value in a film like this that kind of like helps people who have not had experiences like this understand what it is and what it's like, because like we need people who haven't experienced it and don't have the triggers and don't have the trauma to help us change things. Like it can be really hard to talk about, and it can be really hard to like challenge systems if you're coming from a place of trauma. But I think something like this kind of helps you understand why change is necessary in a visceral way rather than an intellectual way.
Yeah. And I feel like that was a tough question. So I feel like I want to ask an easier question as a follow up.
Okay.
And I'm actually going to start with Donato, because I want to get both of your reactions to this. Knowing that this was a stage play first, you walk into a movie theater because a friend has a ticket, or you walk into a theater in Los Angeles in 2005 because a friend has a ticket because they know somebody involved in the production. They're like, hey, come see the show. You go in cold. You watch this happen, not on a screen with a soundtrack and like a little bit of emotional cues from everything that like a filmic environment does, but sort of in real time with two people on a stage with all the uncomfortable dead space and dead silences that come with that. How do you think you feel about Eat Me as a play, Donato?
I mean, you're looking at the friend and just going, "It's a Friday night. What the fuck did we just do this for?"
Totally.
No, I mean, like, listen, the reaction that both of you have stated so far is 100% correct. It is so much to endure, whether it is a play, whether it is a film, for the first 30 minutes, for the first 40 even. But where it goes from there and what it tries to tell between Tommy and Bob, and Tommy has tried to kill themselves and is now back amongst the living. Bob clearly has no qualms about being the biggest piece of shit the world has ever seen, but uh, in a way it takes a turn into rom-com territory, and in a way it becomes like a rom-com through the lens of fucking Vincent Gallo and Waters, and like it is
Mhm.
just this really disgusting, wow, that's a word,
Disgusting.
I mean, it
disgusting,
fits.
depraved. Everything it is showing you is what we are supposed to see as irredeemable, and yet it's also having this underlying message that no matter how broken you are, no matter how much you think it is time to give up and that there is literally no one for you, well, there might be someone for you, and they might be someone who thinks their mother is the most beautiful woman in the world and that they fucked her, but there is still someone in the world, and like there is a bit of, God forbid me using the word, but comfort in that.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
answering the play question, getting back to that part of it, I'm really engaged to see this as a play. I'm really engaged to see two theatrical actors on stage playing this out in real time, because the performances are largely, not even, there's no comparison, the best things in this movie. I mean, everyone is firing all cylinders. How they're able to deliver the lines and the passion that they bring to every single one, no matter how vile the act is. I mean, just getting it out there. There is an entire scene where Tommy is mocking Bob because Bob keeps threatening to rape her. And Tommy, at this point, again, she's tried to kill herself. She has nothing left. And she's just like, I fucking dare you, you piece of shit. Like, you limp dick
Mhm.
piece of whatever. And there is a moment in this film where they are screaming back and forth at each other. I'm raping you. Yeah, you are. Yeah, you're raping me. And it's just them screaming the word rape each other as it's happening. And it does go back to what you were saying, though. It is literally her emasculating him while he's trying to do this thing, because
Mhm.
it's the threat, the threat, the threat. Then it happens and he can't even. It is so fucking much to deal with. And yet that still births these really fucking deep conversations that happen afterwards. And those monologues are where Monagle was saying before, his first reaction 30 minutes in is, I'm turning this off. This is the worst thing we've ever covered on the podcast. Versus, holy shit, this ended in a way that I bring up rom-com again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, I won't pretend like I know exactly where I land on this, but I don't think it was too far off to say that I was like, this was in the running for one of the worst things I've ever seen, and now I don't know how to feel about it at the end of it. And in a good way. Like, I don't know how to feel about it in a good way. I'm not like, did I hate this? I'm like, did I like this? I couldn't have liked it because that first 40 minutes is still there.
Yeah.
And that I think that speaks to just how, I don't know, like how much when you strip away all the artifice and the roles that these characters think that they're supposed to be playing, which is much of what the first 40 minutes is. You know, there's the metatextuality of like the rape revenge film, whether this is or isn't that strictly speaking, these are the archetypes. These are the characters that these two actors are trying to play. And then you kind of strip away all of that and you're left with just two people. And suddenly they're having these conversations that are on par with like any of the indie, you know, anything that you would see at an independent horror film festival. I'm thinking of After Midnight or things like this, like in their own way, like really powerful and sincere conversations about life and desire and hopes and dreams. And you're like, what is like, okay. So it was a movie of swings where I had a really hard time knowing how I feel about it. I still have a really hard time knowing how I feel about it. But
Yeah.
I want to ask you too, Jen, like, what do you think, and maybe more broadly speaking, what do you think about this, knowing you've known this for a while now, but this being translated from a play to a movie, what does that add? What does that subtract? Because we always think of theatrical adaptations in terms of like, oh, how does it compare to the play version?
Hmm.
This feels like a particularly weird thing to talk about because there are, you know, diegetic, non-diegetic elements that are thrown in there. There are soundtrack elements. There is like dream sequences sort of, or like fantasy
Hmm.
sequences that are kind of embedded in it. And I'm like, I'm trying to unpack how that would work on a stage versus on a screen. So I'm kind of curious, as the one of us that's lived with this for the longest period of time, how you kind of feel about what the film version of this adds, what it affords these characters that a stage version might not.
Well, I think it's interesting because I think intimacy is probably my answer. Like when you see this, like you see them up close and personal. You know, you're not 5 rows back or you're not in the back of the theater. So I think there is an intimacy in this situation. I think you really do kind of feel immersed in it. You know, you feel like trapped in this house with them in a way that I don't think you would feel like if you went to see this on a stage. That said, um, I can't imagine being the actress in this and doing this every night, you know, like
Mm,
repeatedly doing this. Cause I think there's a separation when you're watching something on a screen versus watching real human beings in front of you performing these things. And so I don't know what it would be like to watch this in the audience. I think that it would be a different kind of intimacy, you know, like the intimacy of really seeing the pain on her face or seeing the pain on his face, or really kind of like allowing them to whisper the really quiet moments, you know, in a way that is harder to do on a stage. But then on the other hand, you're not watching this live and it's not as visceral, you know?
So the live element for me, I did the Creep LA haunt last year, and seeing things live and the way you are able to push the same boundaries that movies push, and yet live for some reason makes it so much more real and so much
Mm-hmm.
more invasive.
Mm-hmm.
Where I mean, like, number one, let's be honest, like Eat Me the play is not playing the Staples Center, even if you get the nosebleed tickets for the indie showing at your local theater, you're still probably pretty close to that. And I
Mm-hmm.
bring up Creep LA because this is such an offhanded example, but you know, we see male nudity in a way in movies, and
Mm-hmm.
when it is played by an actor, you know, maybe it's the evil role and it is used in a way to kind of, a demon walking at you completely naked has this like unsettling effect.
Mm-hmm.
I'm walking through Creep LA and it is this idea of an Instagram trap that gets taken over by demons, and all of a sudden like the Instagram parts like start coming at you, and I'm just walking by like trying to navigate the area, and I turn to my left and there is just a buck naked dude like basically walking at me with this like creepy ass mask on. And just seeing it in person is still like those intimate things, those things that are screen versus life. I
Mm-hmm.
think the intimacy adds so much more to it. And talking about seeing it live, I think it makes it even harder to watch if I put that in context. I mean, like, it did its job, let's put it that way. It did its job
yeah.
live because it is just a more unsettling thing to see in person versus and that's the effect that it's going for. It's not unsettling to see what I saw. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
life. Like that I'm okay with with the human body. It's more like the character that they create and what they're doing with it. That worked a hell of a lot better when you're standing a few feet away versus separated on a screen.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think when you're watching a filmmaker, like they can choose the camera angles and they can choose, like I'm thinking of the scene where she gets up on the table, and like if that's in a theater, like you have a lot less control over what someone sees and what somebody is watching. Whereas, like, if something didn't feel right when you're filming, you could redo it. Like, there's a safety there. And so I feel like there's a risk involved with doing a live show of something like this that I think I imagine would feel kind of electric and would transfer into the audience with somebody who is able to do a performance like this. And Jacqueline Wright, I think, was in this because you couldn't find another actress who would do it, which I can understand. I
Yeah.
wouldn't want to play this role either.
Yeah, and in interviews, something that I that I think knowing it, you can kind of reflect on the film and feel it is Jacqueline Wright talks about the fact that they shot the film pretty much in chronological order
Mm,
because they were shooting it in her apartment in Los Angeles. And as the film is going on, they were basically wrecking the set because Bob, played by Brad Carter, is, as he's posturing in the first 30 minutes, and Jen, to your point, kind of being the toxic male, like, sexual assault person that he thinks that he should be and is,
mm-hmm.
he's trashing the place as he goes. So in order to account for that, not to have to do like all the complicated resets and continuity stuff they would otherwise, she says that they filmed it pretty much from start to finish in chronological order for the film. And I think that does an interesting thing where I don't know, you can kind of feel that. You can kind of feel that the like the characters were moving because there's such a strong sense of progression in both of their arcs, where like the exhaustion of the first 40 minutes of the film, when they sort of like play out the roles that they think they should be and are kind of left with only who's left. And so they become more introspective and become a lot more relatable as characters, if only to each other and not to us as an audience.
Mm-hmm.
um, I think that there is such a progression of how those characters develop to each other. It would be hard. It's hard for me to imagine them shooting in one room where she's being basically like beaten and stalked by Bob, and then resetting in another room and having them shoot a scene where they're both being vulnerable with each other, and then resetting in a third room and then going back to like the acts of violence. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's, and it might just be the fact that these are for the most part like stage professionals, right? So they think about it as kind of like a chronological thing. But I can't imagine telling the story out of order. It would feel awful to try and shoot this in anything other than chronological order.
Oh, totally. It's such a journey. Like this film, I
Hmm.
feel like one of the things that I love about it, and I have a hard time saying I love this film because it is really challenging, but I love the way it makes me feel by the end. But I think if you don't get through that first part, you don't get that catharsis. Like it's like going through the tunnel versus like going over the bridge. You have to get into the grossness of it to really find that empowerment. But yeah, I can't imagine trying to film. I can't imagine filming this at all. Like it feels
Right.
so like the performances I feel like are so strong that I lose. It's one of those films that I lose track of the fact that it's not real, and I'm just so really engrossed with it. Especially knowing that she wrote this, so I think there's probably a lot of her in Tommy. You know.
Yeah, and I should add too that we talk about this as sort of like these first 40 minutes, and then you get to this we're not talking One Cut of the Dead here. We're not talking
No.
about something that is like totally completely different, and then suddenly you're experiencing a whole different movie. These characters are very much the same characters, but they're tapping into different parts of themselves. So the movie doesn't stop being incredibly uncomfortable at the 40-minute mark. You just start to view these characters in a new way. The 5-minute long monologue about incest does not happen until like the final 15 minutes of the movie, but at that
Yeah.
point you kind of feel for the guy, which is a really weird thing to say. But I want to kind of modulate everybody's expectations going in. This is not a movie where like if you get through the first 30 40 minutes, suddenly it like unfolds as some beautiful different thing. It's
Right.
still ugly. It's just ugly in a way that you really care about.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love the ugliness. Like, I think what kind of like, Donato, what you were kind of talking about there will be somebody for you. I think that's what I get from this, except I think it's more of a personal thing. I watch this and I think, there is nothing that I can do that I can't come back from. There is nothing, because I think we all carry this little secret shame in our pockets. Like, and the silly version is like, oh, I don't recycle my cans, or like, I can't remember all of the laundry lists that she hates herself for. But like, we all have that. And we all think like, if they find out who I am, really, they won't love me, and I can't come back from that, and my life is essentially over. And what I get from this is that there is nothing that will make me unlovable. There is nothing that will make me unworthy of somebody caring about me, even if it's not romantic, or even if it's somebody that I hate. Somebody is going to care about me. And I think if you don't go to those depths of really ugly, really taboo. Like he's talking, you could say the same thing about Brad. Like he's talking about Brad Carter, Bob, the character, one of the most taboo things that a person could do. He's talking about sleeping with his mother, and you still are able to find empathy. And I think that's the power of this movie for me, is that there is nothing that I can do that would make me unlovable. And there's nothing that anyone can do that would make them unworthy of someone caring about them,
Yeah, and it's also evaluating the art for the entire narrative, all the whiplash, all of the messiness, all of the unevenness, everything creates the final product. It's like you said,
Mm-hmm.
if you turn off the movie 30 minutes in, you're going to have a hell of a different perception on what the filmmaker was trying to do versus watching the entire thing. And the journey is so essential because it
Mm-hmm.
unlocks everything. You don't get from point A to point Z without hitting all the steps along the way. It
Yeah.
just doesn't exist. But like it's that same conversation that's kind of happening in a way right now at Fantastic Fest and the sadness. A lot of people are up in arms because there is a scene or two in there that basically, they think it should have been a trigger warning or it should have been shown or all of these things. But the conversation is about the scenes themselves. And like, listen, there should be a trigger warning. Like for people that don't want to see that right now, like, of course, like you should not
Mm-hmm.
be forced to see something that will dredge up something. But I mean, the conversation though, it's not about the entire film. It's about two certain scenes taken completely out of context, and it just the conversation kind of spirals out of there, And I think the same thing would happen in Eat Me if you approached Eat Me from the sense and just talked about the first 30 minutes. You would be losing so much of the depth and weight that happens once the film ends. And
Mm-hmm.
again, does it end on a shot that is literally honoring Bob's incestuous passions? Yes, it
Uh-huh.
does. But do they finally both feel peace in this really, really weird moment that is shot on a beach as he is suckling on Tommy's teat and the camera just pans out? Yeah, they
Mm-hmm.
have. And maybe they had to murder to get there. Maybe they had to do unspeakable things to get there. And maybe they didn't have to. That is part of the conversation. But the
Mm-hmm.
other part of the conversation is addressing every single moment in this film and not just trying to basically tear it down for, two parts that you thought are unnecessary.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
Ugh.
Eat Me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I I mean, we could talk about this film for another hour,
Yeah.
and probably end up kind of in the same place we are now. And we didn't even talk about the scene with the suicide note, which for my money is the moment that the movie became something different and better.
Oh yeah. When he says you're skipping over the parts you don't like, that's when it had my heart. I was like,
Right.
oh yeah.
That if you decide to watch it after listening to this podcast, that is I will say this: if you get through the dinner table conversation about the suicide note and you're still not feeling it, you can probably bail, because if that's not the moment that has worked for you, if the movie hasn't turned around for you or at least become more manageable for you at that point, then it's not going to.
Yeah.
So there's a caveat for you. But I do want to end this, as we always do, by talking about sort of the place of this movie going forward. So, this is a small film, small release. Obviously, we're talking about it on this show, so it didn't really. Although it did have some high profile reviews. The Hollywood Reporter reviewed it. It was reviewed in a couple other places, so it got like some of the marquee reviews that you want if you're a filmmaker, a playwright, bringing your work to the film. It also has a really cool poster, which is neither here nor there. I just wanted to make sure I got that on the record.
Mm-hmm.
Where is this film going to land? Like, what future is there for Eat Me outside of people like us? Is there a future for Eat Me outside of the people that watch every horror film that comes along?
I think I don't know. I would like to be hopeful and say yes. I think there should be. I think it is a very hard film to watch, so I think that's probably where a lot of the kind of under the radar of it comes. And I have a hard time recommending it. It is a challenge. But I think when I think about the conversations that we're having now about sexual violence and about women's autonomy over their bodies and about toxic masculinity and about all of these things, like, it's really easy to just have a conversation about Harvey Weinstein and Bill Cosby. And I think those are the big easy conversations to have because it's so clear and it's so black and white. And I think a movie like this introduces the kind of nuance that is actually going to move those conversations forward. Like, I'm not going to run into somebody like Harvey Weinstein, but I might run into somebody like Bob in the story, who kind of got dragged along to this and just had this expectation of what he's supposed to be. So I feel like movies like this invite the kind of nuanced conversations that I think we need to have. I think there is a place going forward for films like this. Because it's this is never going to be a promising young woman kind of film. It's just it's
Right.
too much. But I think that this is another element of it. This is another side of this conversation, because I think one of the things that this film does that I really love is it examines Bob's character too, and I think that is a big part of the conversation about how women are treated in the world that we often miss. A lot of times it's defensive, like how can you avoid being a victim, not how can I avoid victimizing. And I think that's something this film really explores. So I think there's a place for it. And I don't know how to do that other than just to talk about it, because this is a word of mouth film, and it's like a challenge, but I think there's a lot of value in it.
Donato, along those lines, same question to you, and kind of an addendum. In what context, how would you feel comfortable recommending this movie to somebody?
I think most importantly, it is already on the perfect streaming service for it, the immaculate, the undefeatable Tubi TV. But I do
Not sure. I'm not sure they want the plug now. They would have taken
Right,
the one
exactly.
at the beginning, but after we just had this conversation.
But I do mean that seriously. I do mean that seriously, because if you are going to recommend a movie such as this, such as Eat Me, it is available for free, which I think is a huge thing for a movie that's going to challenge someone. And if you're going to sell Eat Me in any way, you're going to have to compare it to things. You're going to have to compare it to movies that challenge viewers but have come out in the end to show something better to the viewer. I also think that there are distribution arms right now popping up, and do I think that this would work on something like Vinegar Syndrome? I don't know, possibly. But do I think that we now have people like Brad Henderson, I've mentioned a few times, we become friendly. And I mean, Brad Henderson started another arm of Vinegar Syndrome in a way, called TerraVision, that he is now heading. And the first movie they released is a WNUF Halloween special that's never had a Blu-ray release. So it's like he's already taking chances on movies, and I can tell you that like he's taking way bigger chances upcoming in the future. And I think that now that we are getting to the level where we don't even need a Vinegar Syndrome, we can get a Vinegar Syndrome outreach branch to take a gamble on something that I know they have movies that, may not make them a lot of money, but it's stuff that they are passionate about and they want to put to the public. I think that Eat Me does go there. I think Eat Me does fit in at a distro company like that, and they can take a chance on something that is wild and inventive and whatever else you want to call it, in the themes that it is weighing into, because they're the ones that do want to push that art, and they're the ones that do want to push the conversation. So maybe there is like I think I'm getting away from the mindset that you have to be on Vinegar or Arrow or nothing. Maybe you don't. Maybe you can get on Second Sight. Maybe you can get on all these other smaller distros, and maybe that's where Eat Me does find another audience.
Yeah, honestly, I love both the points you make. The only thing that I'll add to the conversation is just that it's having kind of a jokey conversation on Twitter today with a buddy, and they happened to mention that Tubi TV has a knack for putting the commercial breaks in the most inappropriate and wild spots. And I have to say, watching Eat Me with commercial breaks is the most disassociative like experience I've probably ever had as a viewer with any kind of film I've watched. Because like you were watching this movie and then they cut away and they're like, "Are you happy with your credit card?" And I'm like, "Oh my Lord in heaven above." So yeah, I will just say it is free on Tubi. There will be people. There's going to be people that will watch the movie just because somebody like Jen or you, Donato, recommend that they should. So it's great that it's on Tubi and you can watch it there. And I am with you. I mean, there are record labels for any caliber of vinyl releases now, and there are DVD and Blu-ray and 4K labels for any caliber. There are movies that are getting releases in the hundreds, and they're going to run a movie 500 times, and that movie will only ever exist in that physical disc form 500 times. Maybe Eat Me is one of those, but I guarantee you there's going to be 500 really fucking happy people that they own Eat Me on 4K, and they will have a couple of movie nights at their place. Uncomfortable movie nights.
I
but
was just
movie
gonna
nights
say,
nonetheless.
a little awkward. What do you serve?
I don't know. Oh God. Wow. What would you say?
Monocle? Like
Popcorn?
what
I
dinner
guess?
parties are you hosting?
Popcorn? There's popcorn in the movie.
Yes,
Popcorn and
yes.
pills.
Popcorn and pills.
Flintstone vitamins and popcorn.
Yeah.
All right. That is our episode. I
Whew.
mean, I hope you know if you're going to watch Eat Me or not at the end of all that. Because
Yeah.
as always, the movies that I come in the most conflicted about, we have some of the best conversations. I think this was no exception, Jen. Thank you for being our guest. Thank you for bringing us this film. This is again, as we've been on a streak of movies that I have been really questionable about, but ended up loving. Is one of my favorite conversations we've had on the show. So
Oh, well, thank you.
let
Well,
me let me give you a moment to promote yourself. What are the social handles for the other podcasts you're on? Where can people go to find your work or kind of stay on top of the writing and podcasting that you're doing?
Well, before I say all of that stuff, I want to say thank you for having me on the show, and thank you for talking about this movie. This is, not a lot of people or pods would kind of engage in this kind of conversation, so I really appreciate it. But yeah, you can follow me on social places at Jenn Ferratu with 2 N's, and you can find me co-hosting the Losers Club podcast and the Psychoanalysis podcast. And if you enjoyed the conversation that we had today, you will enjoy psychoanalysis. This is the kind of stuff we talk about. We get into the ugly meat of movies a lot of times, but it's also really fun too. I make some inappropriate jokes quite often, but yeah, so you can find Losers Club Pod on social media, and you can find Psycho A Pod also. And yeah, you can find me writing on the fantastic Certified Forgotten. I have 2 pieces there that I am really proud of. And again, another I like to write about feelings, and I think I am really appreciative that you will run stuff like that, because I know a lot of sites won't, and they just want to hear like an analysis or just a review. And I think the way I like to approach film is to really explore what it brings out in me, and or what it reminds me of, and what it helps me process. And so I think your site is just fantastic for providing a platform for that. So yeah, you can find 2 of my pieces there, and then I also have been writing for Rue Morgue and Ghouls Magazine, and just lots of places. If you follow me, I'll post them all. So yeah, that's me.
Awesome. You should do that. And thank you. We're either really smart or we don't know how to run a business. Either one of those is probably the
Oh
right
no,
answer.
you're really smart.
Donato, promote thyself, my friend.
As always, you can find me, Matt Donato, at DonatoBomb on Twitter, Letterboxd, and Instagram. You will see my Scariest Stories column. You will see my, not Scary Stories, that is the title of a movie and a book. You will see my Scariest Scenes column. You will also see my Bloody Disgusting remake column. You will also see everything else that I do. It is busy season right now for me, so I am buried under a stack of horror screeners that are over my eyes, over my apartment, and over my apartment building. So once I get out of that, maybe you'll see some other kind of content. But for now, just buckle in. Lots of horror reviews. Maybe some Undertaker interactive Netflix specials. I don't fucking know. Let's see.
I'll help you promote yourself. If you go to Donato's bio, you'll see that he has a link to his Authory account. I would recommend you sign up as a subscriber to that, because at the end of every week, you'll get an email with everything that he wrote in that week. And that's actually, it's not fucking easy to keep track of where you're writing from and who you're writing for. In any given week, you have 4 or 5 different sites that you'll publish for. So sign up for Donato's Authory. That'll make life a lot easier for you if you're trying to check out his stuff.
And sign up for Monocles, because he also has an Authory.
I don't write that much at all. I just write for the Chronicle and a couple other places, which you can find if you follow me on Twitter at Matt Monagle. I also do encourage you, and thank you, Jen, for the kind words, to visit Certified Forgotten. We have great writing from writers like Jenn Adams. But it's a cavalcade of funness, I think, is our website. We on our best days, we're giving people an opportunity to write about the kind of stuff that they might not be able to pitch anywhere else. And you're as likely to see an analysis of Molly Henry going off on the original Cat People, or a deep dive into a Japanese animated ripoff of Alien. We're running the gamut over there. Again, nobody told us how to run a business, so we're doing it the only way we want to do it. But that is it for this episode. Jenn, thank you for having us on your podcast. Thank you for joining us on ours.
Thank you.
We will if you can ever think of a movie even that makes you half as excited as Eat Me, we would love to have you back on.
Oh, awesome. Well, that's a challenge. So I will, I will pick up the gauntlet. Yeah. And I also have to say, I am coming up at you. You're like 1 point ahead of me as we speak, Donato. So
Ooh.
Listen.
I'm coming for you.
Don't worry. I'm 0-3 in that league, so don't worry.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Donato, I want you to take us out, but it has to be fantasy football related. Go.
Oh, I was actually going to just whisper "eat me" into the microphone.
No, don't do that. That's gross.
No, is that okay? Good.
Robinson.
Joe Mixon sucks.
Joe Mixon's the best.
And